Today, we're talking about plants that thrive in low light conditions and are super easy to care for. But first, let's clear up a common mix-up. There's a big difference between no light and low light. No light means complete darkness, like a closet with the door shut. And realistically, no plant's gonna be able to survive those kind of conditions. Low light, on the other hand, is indirect light or dim spaces, like a room with just a small window. And that's where today's plant picks shine, or that's where they grow, rather. Now, if you're the type of person who has ever said to yourself,
"Why does every plant I touch seem to die?"
Don't worry, you're not alone. It happens to the best of us. We'll go over some plants that are basically indestructible, plus a few that are a bit more finicky, but totally worth the effort. So let's go ahead and dig in, pun totally intended. These plants are perfect if your home doesn't get much sunlight, if you tend to forget to water your plants, or if you're new to houseplants and you just want to build some confidence in yourself that you're able to care for a living thing. If that sounds like you, then congrats, you're in the right place. So let's go ahead and start off with some of the easiest plants that are super forgiving. Now, it would be an absolute crime to not bring up the snake plant as the first plant on this list. It's also known as the Sansevieria. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, this plant is one tough cookie. It'll survive in low light conditions, and it only needs water like every 4 to 6 weeks. It has relatively thick leaves and super thick roots, and that's where it stores all of its water. And that's what really makes it drought tolerant. If you think that the snake plant is a little bit too common, not exciting enough, just doesn't tickle your pickle, then I recommend that you check out the ZZ plant. Now, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the ZZ plant comes from Eastern Africa. So as you can imagine, it thrives in drought-like conditions. It comes in 2 versions, the green version and another version that's a little bit darker, and that's known as the Black Raven ZZ. And that is one of my favorite houseplants ever because the foliage is so dark, it's so appealing. It definitely makes for a good house decoration around Halloween time. So I absolutely love it. It has thick leaves, a thick stem, and it grows these potato looking things. I'm pretty sure they're referred to as rhizomes. And that's where it stores all of its water. I basically let this plant dry out all the way in between waterings, and it's absolutely thriving. Next up is the cast iron plant. This plant kind of originates from shaded forests of China and Japan. So it's definitely used to low light conditions. And with the name like cast iron plant, you know it's gonna be a survivor. You're not gonna have any problems if you happen to forget watering it. And again, this plant just basically thrives on neglect. Next up is the pothos. This is one of my favorite plants. It's a trailing plant. It comes in quite a few different versions. If you give it something to climb up, the leaves will get massive. It's native to the tropical Solomon Islands, where it grows as a climbing vine in the forest. If you happen to take a vacation to Hawaii, you'll probably see some of these giant Hawaiian pothos climbing up trees, and the leaves are literally bigger than your head. As far as care goes, this plant is not as drought tolerant as something like a ZZ plant or a snake plant. It's gonna be okay if it dries out in between waterings. If you happen to see that the leaves look a little sad, a little droopy, that's a good time to go ahead and fully soak all of that soil. This plant is kind of like a staple when it comes to houseplants because it makes just for a really good decor piece to put in a window because of its beautiful trailing foliage. Those were the sturdiest of sturdy plants that you could get. Now we'll go ahead and increase the difficulty just a little bit and start out by talking about the money tree. So this plant is said to bring good luck and fortune. The money tree loves bright indirect light, but will tolerate low light conditions like a champ. This plant has a super thick trunk where it stores a lot of its water, so it's totally okay if you miss watering. A little bit of a fun story with this plant. I had got it just to kind of throw in a corner, just to brighten up my home office a little bit. I didn't know anything about plants. It got root rot, which is when the roots rot. When I started to figure out what it needed and it started bouncing back, I saw success in my career as well. So I definitely think there's a little something there when it comes to its name being the money tree. Call me crazy. If you're looking for some fortune in your life, I definitely recommend trying out that plant. Next up is the Dracaena. It has tall, stylish leaves that look really fancy, but at the end of the day, this plant is super low maintenance. Like a lot of the other plants, go ahead and let this plant dry out in between waterings. Put it next to a window if you're able to, and it's gonna do just fine. Next up is the rubber plant, aka Ficus elastica. This plant's native to the humid forest of South and Southeast Asia, where it grows as a towering tree. Yes, it's an actual tree. It can get pretty big. This plant loves bright indirect light, but it can survive in lower light. Just go ahead and water it when it's completely dry. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Let's talk about the Chinese evergreen, aka Aglaonema. Like a lot of others, comes from a forest environment where it's used to shaded areas. It has colorful patterned leaves, it's low maintenance, and makes for a pretty solid statement piece. Next up is one of my personal favorites. It's the ponytail palm. It's native to the desert regions of Mexico, where it stores a lot of its water in its trunk. This thing absolutely looks quirky. It looks like it should be in a Dr. Seuss book. I don't know how this plant does it, but it can take direct sun and can also survive in low light conditions. The versatility of this plant really makes it one of my favorites, because if I want to put it inside, you know, put it on a desk, make it look pretty, I could do that. Or if I want to make room for more plants, I could just throw it in my backyard and it'll do great. This plant, along with my Black Raven ZZ, when I have people over at the house, it catches their eye and they're like, what's that plant? Let's go ahead and take it up a notch. We're gonna go into slightly more green thumb plants. These are the finicky but rewarding plants that I was telling you about. First up is the peace lily. This plant comes from South America, where it thrives in humid understories, basically shaded conditions. If you ever wanted a plant to tell you when it's thirsty, this is that plant. It's gonna look very droopy when it needs water. Soak all of that soil and it'll perk back up. It's definitely known as somewhat of a drama queen. A few reasons you might want this plant. Number one is it's thought to bring peace to whatever space that you put it in. So maybe like a work environment or maybe even a bedroom. That's a good place to have some peace, right? Number two is that it blooms pretty frequently. If you want something that kind of has consistent flowers over its lifespan, this might be the plant for you. Next up is Anthurium, and there's a lot of different species, but I'm talking specifically about the low maintenance varieties, the super common ones that you could find at like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. These plants do pretty well in low light conditions. They're used to growing along the forest floor. This plant will be okay if it dries out all the way. However, I find with the Anthurium that I care for, I let them almost dry out all the way. If they dry out too much, they will get crispy leaves. These ones, it's okay to, water it when the soil is almost dry. The perk with this plant is that it's gonna go ahead and push out flowers pretty frequently. Next up is the prayer plant. This plant comes from the rainforest of Brazil, so it's used to kind of dappled sunlight and high humidity. One cool thing about this plant is that the leaves actually fold up at night, kind of like if you were praying. The leaves kind of move around throughout the day so that way it could get the most light possible. I just think it's really cool. Not many plants kind of move throughout the day like that. This plant likes humidity. It can be a little bit prone to crispy leaves, but I think it kind of makes up for it with its low light capabilities. This is another one of those plants that probably wouldn't be too happy with drying out all the way. I would water it when the top 75% of that soil is dry. And one way you can go ahead and check the soil dampness is by sticking a skewer, a chopstick into the soil, give it a little twirl, pull it out, kind of like baking a cake. You can kind of see where the soil level is. Next, I want to talk about general low light plant care tips. When it comes to lighting, it's good to rotate your plants occasionally so that way they could grow out evenly. If it's really dark, consider getting a grow light. A light meter can also be super helpful to figure out what lighting is right for you. It measures the light in foot candles so you can check if your plant spot gets enough light to thrive. Now, when it comes to watering, stick to the soak and dry method. Water thoroughly and then let the soil completely dry out. Overwatering is one of the most common reasons most plants don't stay alive, so resist the urge to love them to death. Moving into humidity, if your plant looks crispy, put it near a humidifier. If you don't have a humidifier, try grouping plants together. They'll create their own little tropical microclimate. When it comes to fertilizing, a little plant food during the spring and summer goes a really long way. Think of it as their version of a protein shake. When it comes to grow lights, humidifiers, plant food, and all of my recommendations for those kind of things, I'm gonna go ahead and list them in the description down below. So be sure to check that out if that's something that you're interested in. All right, guys, there you have it. Whether you're a total beginner or just want to add some easy care plants to your collection, these are some really great options. I recommend starting out with 1 or 2 of these plants to just kind of build up your confidence, see if plant care is something that you're even interested in, and then just seeing where it goes from there. Feel free to show some love on this video. It actually helps and it encourages me to continue making videos like the one that you're watching now. By the way, YouTube thinks that you're gonna like this video, so check it out and I'll see you in the next one.